Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of The Complete Advisor. I am so glad that you are joining us. I will introduce this young advisor across the table. You know, at JP at one time I never had to say that I was always the youngest guy in the room, and Father Time keeps marching on. But for those of you out there, think back to when you started in this industry, wherever you started. At some point, you were the young one in the room. You had to talk to clients demographically. You know, our sweet spot demographically is somewhere, somebody sitting about, 55-ish, 65, getting close to retirement, or they've retired, which means that they have assets. And as much as we want to help as advisors, we want to help people get there during the accumulation phase. That's a long game. Having that client on the other side that actually has assets that you can put to work, put them either under management or into a product, whatever of course fits the client, but they actually have something to work with. A friend of mine used to always say you can't build sandcastles out of mud. You actually have to have some sand. And so it's one thing to build a plan for somebody. That's kind of a hypothetical down the road. It's another thing when you actually have the assets to put to work. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to talk to an advisor by the name of JP from Florida. JP is out there at the tender young age. I don't believe that I'm saying tender young age, but right there in the mid-30s, about 36, birthday 36. Coming up here. JP, tell us a little bit, in a nutshell, tell us your bona fides, your practice, where you're at, where you focus, what you're doing right now.
Yeah. So currently based out of Orlando, Florida, solo advisor practice. And right now I kind of specialize in the retirement planning niche. Mm-hmm. We spoke a little bit before about the niche that I serve, working with these public service professionals throughout the state of Florida. And so primarily that's what I'm focused on. It's a combination of retirement planning and investments for my clients.
Love it. So you're on both sides. That we were talking off before we turned the mics on, but so you've got the public sector, mm-hmm. but then you're also branching out and working with clients that maybe may or may not be public sector. So one way you're doing it, just to fill this in, and fact check me, a lot with the 403B market educators. Mm-hmm. But then at the same time, now you're branching out, looking at doing dinner seminars and working with people that are closer to retirement.
Right. So combination, doing these live events, the dinner seminars, the educational workshops, all gearing towards that baby boomer demographic here, those that are, in retirement, near retirement, 5 to 10 years out, with different asset minimums that are able to kind of ready and able to start planning and preparing for retirement. Yeah.
So let me ask you this. How long ago did you start in the biz?
Oh, wow. Gosh, I think it's going on 11 years now.
Okay, so you were like fresh out of school and
right. A little older. I think I got my insurance license in 2014. Started with a big mutual insurance company. So that was probably about 4 years out of college.
Nice. Okay, so that would put you at about 26, 27, right in that
26,
range.
27. Yeah.
Okay, so you and I were talking, and a lot of people don't know this, but I'm pretty open about what I did. Actually, I probably have talked about this, how my dad should have fired me. I came out into the industry right out of college, and one of the challenges I had was there was that big age gap of I'm in my very early 20s talking to people who are 30 years older. I have zero responsibilities other than, getting up and staying alive, and they have kids and family and retirement. So thinking back, and maybe you still get this, but do you ever get the, you're old enough to be my son? Or young enough? You're young enough to be my son.
Yeah, there you go. Young enough. No, I certainly do. That's definitely true. Not so much when I started out, because I was actually focused on working with people that I knew, right? And then so it was kind of my peers in the beginning. But then, the goal is you start prospecting with your parents' friends or your uncle's friends. And, then, right, in my mid-20s, I certainly got that a lot. And it was one of those things where it was, how do I overcome this? You would actually go into these meetings or these phone calls, these prospecting calls with some apprehension, because they're not going to possibly take me seriously, old enough to be their child or their grandchild in some instances. So it's kind of, It's that feeling's kind of tapered off with experience, obviously, and getting older. I think you age up, and but it's still there.
Well, so as you are working, and one area that I the more I think about, the questions that I have that I put together for you, an area we're going to spend a lot of time on is communication preferences and differences. But if you think back, how do you relate to older clients without coming across as disingenuous?
Well, that's a good question. For me, I think it's really about just having empathy and being genuine and coming from a place to where you really want to help them, right?
Yeah.
My background is such to where, one of the main reasons and drivers for me getting into the industry was just my upbringing growing up. And so, my parents, like I mentioned, first generation immigrants from Haiti, they put their head down, they went to work, but, they didn't really have that financial literacy, and, no one taught it to them, and they didn't have the resources or the bandwidth to kind of go out and learn that on their own.
Yeah.
And so growing up, there was some, challenges, right? Didn't lack for anything materially growing up. But I always remember money being this, nefarious, obscure thing that was hardly ever talked about.
Yeah.
Right. And so growing up, when the car got repoed, didn't understand why. When a year later, when we lost a home, I didn't understand why.
Yeah.
And that just kind of instilled in me this desire to learn everything I could about finances, right? How to increase one's, net worth, how to find financial security, how to plan and prepare for retirement, first and foremost, so that I could help my parents.
Sure.
Right? That was kind of that impetus for me, if you will. And then, by then, I got to the point where I was able to, and then I wanted to translate that into people in the community, because there's a lot of people out there, that are in those similar situations that don't have help or don't have access to the financial literacy. So I approach every individual that's old enough to be my parents' age as if they were, right? And I think that comes across in the conversations that I have.
Do you think that's interesting? So I was going to ask you, like, if you have any ways to break the ice, or if it is just your demeanor. And one thing I'm thinking as you're talking is one of my older brothers.
Sure.
Was always amazing. Even when he was in his 20s, he's in this industry. I always just said he had an old soul, because he was more comfortable with people 20 to 30. He's just so serious.
Yeah.
And I don't think people ever saw that age difference in him. And I wonder if your personal experience, if that just oozes out, or if you have a way to break the ice.
Yeah, that's a good question to kind of think about. I think a lot of it's probably that. To your point, I've been told that as well at certain points in my life, that I had an old soul, right? And so I can relate to different types of pop culture that were way before my time. We're talking about music and movies, and
Sure.
being able to relate in that way as kind of icebreakers, if you will. But really, yeah, it's kind of innate in this my personality, being able to kind of meet them where they're at, if you will.
I think another thing and I already have picked this up from you just in talking to you, but I've been at events and different things where, say a speaker comes up, and you look and you're like, my goodness, that person has such a baby face. What are they like? Are they a junior in high school? And then they start talking. And then you can see that they know what they're saying. And then I've always said that all of a sudden, age doesn't, as soon as they start talking and have the expertise, the age doesn't matter, because then you're listening to what they're saying.
Right.
And from our conversations before we turned the mics on, I know that you really know your stuff. And I imagine that probably bleeds through too.
Yeah. That certainly does. And, and that's more of a learned thing, where you got to, own your craft. And stay up to date with the industry and what's happening, right? And so that you were able to speak to it when you're in front of a client. And, I think for me, with my background in sports and, practicing and putting the reps in, that was always something. I didn't want to ever go into an appointment disadvantaged because I didn't know something. And I was always, hyper aware or even apprehensive to the fact that, the person in front of me on the other side of the table knows more than I do, and it's going to come out, right? Or they might say something that I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember an advisor, an old mentor of mine, that kind of helped put my mind at ease, right? Because I would just try to consume information. But, the fact of the matter is, you probably know more than the person that you're sitting down in front of, right? More times than not. And so just walking in and having that confidence, I think that is going to exude, the fact that you know your stuff, right? If you say it confidently. And that's kind of the, in this business, there's the art and the science, right? The science is the data, the numbers, the math, right? Putting together the plans. But the art is how you communicate that. And you really kind of have to marry the two. But if you don't get the art right, the science doesn't matter, right? Because you're not building rapport, you're not building credibility, they're not going to trust you, right? You're not connecting on that deeper level, all right? And so it starts with, that first handshake or the eye contact or the greeting, right? However you're portraying yourself.
Do you see? So let's talk communication. I think is where we're gonna end up spending the rest of our time, because that's an area that I think is fascinating. The more I think about it. So I was telling you a little bit about my mom, and she's in her 80s now, and she just got her first iPhone. She had an iPad for a while, got the iPhone, and we had to talk to her about what all caps means, and so do you notice when you're working with people? So we were talking about this because I'm a Gen Xer and you're, millennial?
Yeah.
Millennial.
Yeah, there you go.
And so we're talking, like if I was out in the field, you'd be talking to Gen X's and then baby boomers.
Yeah.
So have you noticed any difference in communication style? Have you noticed maybe how you approach different age ponder it for a second, because I will tell you this.
Right.
Our two girls, one is 29, one is 33. And geez, I could say that like you're old enough. Anyway, but there I can see a communication style between the two of them is like the cutoff of where Facebook was popular. The older one's on it, the other one couldn't care at all.
Right. Interesting.
But okay, so do you notice maybe subconsciously? Do you do it on purpose? Maybe more face-to-face with maybe one age demographic versus...
Yeah, certainly. And, I think this all goes back to communication, right? There's like a trick where you can mimic or mirror someone when they're speaking, and I've kind of, honed in on that art, if you will, where, I kind of try to meet them where they're at. Now, if I'm talking to someone that's my peer, I have, a couple clients that are also millennials, and, I kind of speak to them as such, right? So we're hanging out, we're chopping it up, but at the end of the day, I'm a peer, but I'm an expert in what I do.
Yeah.
I think when I'm sitting down with someone that's, baby boomer or Gen X, there's more a bit of decorum, right, that kind of goes into it initially, right? And, respect your elders, that sort of deal. You want to make a good impression. And so I kind of tailor that conversation, but everybody's different, right? So I could, have someone come in and, they're super analytical, right? The engineer types, right? Yeah. And that's always a tough one because they're hard cold math. They want to see the facts. They want to see the numbers.
And
spreads.
Read everything.
Right. And read everything. It's okay. And I'm kind of like that too, right? And my lawyer brain in me is just like, every document I'm going to read it through. But you kind of have to adjust to that and adapt. So I think that's kind of the main takeaway for me there is being able to, be ready to adapt, right? Yeah. And then some people want to talk about their grandkids or, their family vacation. And so you let them, right? And you meet them where they're at. Again, I know I keep saying that, but that's really what it is. I mean, most of these people, you let them do the talking, and they'll show you how you should conduct yourself in that meeting.
How about let's switch gears just a touch to tech. So, in the last 10 years, the use of e-applications on the non-registered side of the world is it's exploded.
Right.
My wife and I just bought and sold a house, and we did almost all paperwork electronically, which was different than what we did 10 years ago. So how are you working with clients? Are you notice anything when it comes to clients the use of tech? Like, are you using a client portal, client vault, anything like that for documents, e-signatures? How's that working for you?
Yeah. So I'm definitely tech forward. I think that's important as far as streamlining business processes, making things easier for the client. Now, I will say that some clients are going to be all for it, and
Sure.
some clients want nothing to do with it, right? And so, for example, my father, he's 78, and this man's on all the social media platforms. He's ordering Uber Eats and gosh, Facebook Marketplace. And my mom, who's almost 10 years his junior,
Yeah.
right? This doesn't know how to work the smartphone,
Yep.
right? And so
Yep.
you're gonna, you're gonna come across a range of individuals with their abilities in tech. But I think for the most part, everybody knows where the world is moving, and at the end of the day, it's about convenience, right?
Yeah.
And so as far as virtual meetings, e-applications, I have some clients that still like to meet face to face. Some clients that if they don't have to get in their car and drive 20, 30 minutes to see you, and then can jump on a Zoom meeting, they will figure it out, right?
You ever get frustrated with that?
Yeah, sometimes. Matter of fact, I was in office the other day, and we were trying to. I was trying to help a client out with some documents, and multi-factor authentication, right? That's rampant. That's everywhere.
Yep.
And so they had to send the authentication to my client's phone, and for some reason, she said the text is not coming in. Can we try to call them? The call's not coming in. I'm like, man, this is a government agency sending out these calls and text messages to verify identity so that she can get access to her information, and it just wasn't happening. We sat there for about 15, 20 minutes. At that point, I said, you know what, you mind if I see your phone? She had it on do not disturb, okay? And so we just had to press that button right there, 15 minutes gone. We had a good laugh about it, all right? And user error, right, at that point. And that happens a lot, but you just got to have to laugh about it and move on.
I think there's no better teacher of patience than, because my dad, my parents are about 10 years older than yours, and I'm kind of their tech support.
Yeah.
And so getting a call and trying to get my dad, my dad's on his. I told you that my dad should have fired me for years because I worked for him. I pay for his cable so he can watch his favorite sports channels.
All right.
And but before every game, we're both fans of the same team. Usually, right about tip-off, he'll call and need help logging in. And the game has started, or I'm at the game, and it's like, I love you, Dad. You carried me. This is my part to help you. But sometimes it's like, what are you looking at? Tell me again what you're looking at.
Right.
I've even done to where it's like, Dad, take your phone and turn it so I can actually see what you're looking at. And sometimes it's a soul killer, but
it can be frustrating.
it is what it is. Do you find yourself using different language with different? So you're as a younger guy. So you, especially in that 403B market, I imagine you're running into a lot of, you run into a lot of new educators that are younger, and then you go from having a conversation there with the language you would use there versus any phraseology that you would use that's different from Gen X? You find yourself, or Gen's, baby boomers and such?
Right.
Anything that pop in your mind? Or are you just doing it so seamlessly you're not even noticing anymore?
Yeah, I think the key there for me is I always try to say things in a way that's easily digestible, right? And that they can understand, right? And so I'm not really using a lot of industry jargon. Yeah, exactly, if you will, to break things down. And again, it kind of depends on the person I'm sitting down in front of, right? If I'm talking to this, engineer type that wants to act like he knows his stuff and he's a DIYer, right? Then maybe I'll throw some words at him, and then we can have a conversation about it. But if I'm talking to your general retiree or your person just starting out that's in that accumulation stage of their retirement, I want things to be digestible. I want them to understand, because at the end of the day, the confused mind says no, always.
Yes.
Right? And so I really take that, working with educators is what I got from them. I really take that education stance when it comes to teaching about financial topics, right?
Do you, let me ask you this, have you started, or have you in the past use your youth to your advantage. Meaning, I think about this because a lot of advisors that I get to meet, a lot of times they're typically the age of their clientele.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm the clientele and I'm looking across at my advisor and the guy's the same age as I am, when's he going to retire,
Right.
and what
How long are we
happens if
doing
he
this?
takes the long dirt nap?
Right. No, certainly. And I find that especially useful when they'll bring it up, right? And so I've had that happen a lot of times where they'll say, hey, so my advisor is 68, and he's still going, right? Bless his heart. But I don't know if he's going to be there, right, much longer. He's probably going to retire. I don't know. And most of advisors out there that are in that space aren't really talking about succession planning with their clients, and they're just doing what they've always done, right?
Yep.
And so once I hear that, I'll kind of position myself as, hey, well, I've been doing this for over 11 years, and this is going to be my only profession, right? So I'll be here. And then it's a conversation about, well, that generational impact, right? So I can help your children. I'll be there to help their children throughout the years, okay? And so once you build that rapport and establish that trust, and then they know you're there, you can definitely use that to your advantage. I say all day.
Use it all day.
Yeah, use it all
You
day.
said something that popped into my head a second ago that has nothing to do with the
Yeah, what's
financial
that?
side. You use the classic bless his heart, and my wife and I were talking about somebody that maybe we don't view that favorably, and I said bless his heart. She's like, why are you blessing him? I'm like, no. And I had to explain to her that it's kind of it's a left-handed bless your heart, like a sympathy heart.
Right, there you go.
Well, so let's talk about another thing there. So, do you use any classic old school strategies that maybe other younger advisors might ignore? For example, my mom continually badgers me about thank you notes, handwritten thank you notes, which I've never done, but I will say that if I get a handwritten note, I'm kind of tickled because it's like, wow, who the heck does that? Yeah. Are there any old school techniques that pop into your head that maybe when you're talking to your age peers in the industry that you're like, wow, I'm not going to tell them that they're not doing this, but this is something I do?
It's funny you mentioned the handwritten notes. I do that, and it was actually an older advisor that kind of recommended that I do, right? For whatever reason, I took his advice reluctantly at first because, who didn't want to write handwritten notes after every meeting? But it's a personal touch, and it works, right?
Nobody does it.
Habit, right? No one really does it anymore. Or even, so many people texting so widespread these days. Everybody has their head down texting. No one really thinks to pick up the phone anymore and do a checkup call on a client, right? Or to, ask them how they're doing, right? How's their plan? How's the family, right? And so it's usually everyone's so automated to sit down and text a message. You kind of lose the ethos in the communication, if you will. And those little touches kind of keep that.
What about do you do client events at all? But besides dinner seminars, are you doing any client appreciation or anything along those lines?
You know what? To be fair, I haven't, and that's something I really want to get into. Matter of fact, been making some plans to do that. Pickleball's kind of taken off, right?
Yeah.
And so,
love me some pickleball.
Yeah, and it really has taken that baby boomer demographic by. Everyone's out there playing pickleball, and we have this nice court at this local gym in my community, and so I think what I'm planning on doing probably around springtime is hosting this pickleball tournament for my clients.
Sign me up.
Yeah, it should be fun. A little healthy competition, Hopefully nobody gets hurt out there in the courts, but yeah, want to get into more of that. Certainly.
Nice. Yeah, that's an interesting area. Is doing that. I've seen at our local coffee shop, we bumped into somebody that was just. This was, I don't know how well. I wish that I would have had more time to talk to this guy.
Yeah.
But there was an investment professional, financial advisor there, and he was just hanging out with another. I don't know if it was his business partner.
Yeah.
But they were just picking up coffee for everybody for about an hour.
Really?
Which actually, when you think about it, that could get pretty pricey because
sure. Yeah.
As I point out to my wife, I'm like, that's just water and some coffee beans.
Right.
Now your drink is much more, but I'm just getting a cup of coffee, and that was still $5, which
That adds up.
Don't get me started. I'll
Yeah.
sound like
Yeah.
I'll sound like my grandfather here. But okay, so let's talk about this. Have you ever misread a situation based on generational or age cues? You ponder that. I'll tell you. So one time I was out as a financial advisor. I met this guy. He came into the office. I did this beautiful analysis report, and I was like, okay, so Arthur, if you look here, you can see that your fixed income here, it's the blue one. And he looked at me because it's this beautiful pie chart, and he said, I bet that looks really good, and I appreciate the time you spent on it, but I'm colorblind. And I'm like, oh, okay, so the grayer part.
Oh,
Total misread.
Wow. Yeah, that definitely takes the cake there. That's funny. How do you recover from that?
Well, you didn't get the client is what happened.
Nice. Yeah, I'm trying to think, really. I can't say that I have any glaring stories.
Generational is a tough one.
Right. Part of me, of maybe going into the weeds too much on a financial plan and them really not wanting to hear about that, right? And I feel like my generation, the millennials, are kind of more hands-on, right? They want to be involved in the process from A to Z. They want to know what investments, right, you're picking, the strategies, and so on and so forth. Well, maybe, and they're up with the lingo. I think more of my millennial counterparts are probably up on the financial jargon than more of these baby boomers are.
Do you see though? So let me ask you. That's a great. That's interesting. So do you see more? I wouldn't say backseat driving, but maybe somewhere between backseat driving and pushback on your suggestion, on your recommendations from one generation versus the other. So what I'm saying is like, do you see maybe the, maybe the baby boomer late Gen X is like, okay, JP knows this. I trust him.
Right.
I'm going to go with this recommendation.
Right.
Versus a younger demographic that is more prone to being online and looking things up, and is used to a million sources of information, saying like, well, wait a second, why are we using the PIMCO strategy XYZ?
Right.
Do you get any? Do you notice any of that?
Yeah. So I'd say definitely with my age demographic, there's a lot more. I guess you can say, for lack of a better word, challenging. Right. They'll challenge the strategies and the recommendations. Because they want to know, and they've done their own research, and they formulated their own opinions and their own thoughts, right?
Interesting.
And so it's an interesting conversation, right? Where you'll have some millennial asking me about direct indexing or tax loss harvesting or right. Different types of funds and what have you, social governance funds, right? Everybody has their thing with the millennial generation these days. I feel like when you get to the baby boomers or the Gen Xers, they just want to make sure that they're okay in retirement, right? And so, they don't want to talk about alpha and standard deviation and
Sharpe's ratio.
Right. I mean, they want to know how all of that's relevant to their portfolio, and more so, are they going to have enough money to last them to and through retirement, right? And so, I remember going down a report from Morningstar, going over like a correlation report and showing all of that, and they're like, hey, buddy, what is this? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What does this mean for my portfolio? Is that good or bad?
Yeah.
And so they didn't want to listen to that whole spiel. Okay, you got to put that the report away and say, well, Mr., Mrs. Prospect, whoever you're speaking to, this is what this means, right? Whether it's your portfolio's this, but it could be more efficient in this way, right? And this is how you make your money last. This is how you optimize the investments inside your portfolio, right? And so it's funny, you get trained and you learn a new software, and you geek out on it, and you get excited, and the first thing you want to do when you use it is you go across the table and tell them all the cool little things that you know now.
Yeah, I love that you just turned your paper upside down so I could read it.
Right. You're not ready. Right.
Sales skills right there.
Yeah. And so, but sometimes that's not always the best technique or tactic, right? And so, knowing the demographic and the person you're speaking to is important.
That is some good. That was beautiful. That was
You
a
like
beautiful.
that?
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
My dad. So I would go out on appointments with my dad, and my dad could read upside down.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
He would transpose the numbers.
Right.
It was great, but he could read upside down and present.
Could he write upside down too when he's presenting? Like
he could not.
Yeah?
He
Okay.
could not.
Yeah.
We have had a guy in the podcast that can read backwards and pronounce everything.
Wow,
Which is pretty cool.
That's cool.
So that is interesting because that is definitely interesting. I also think have you ever used your age as a competitive advantage with older clients?
Yeah. I think that goes back to the topic before of someone comes in, they have an advisor that they've had for years, decades maybe, and maybe they're thinking about leaving a legacy for their children and their grandchildren, and they want to make sure that they have an advisor that's going to be in the business to be able to oversee that transfer of wealth, right? And so at that point, I definitely use that to an advantage. And not necessarily that I have to exploit anything, because I feel like if that's the case or concern or worry, when you're in that fact finder meeting, then they're kind of telling you what the problem is. All you have to do is position yourself as knowledgeable, trustworthy, and then take it from there, right?
Do you ever see, this is a weird one.
Yeah.
Do you ever see like almost like a maternal paternal thing with older clients? Like I'm not phrasing this right, but almost like this affection, because not only are you're their financial guy,
Right.
but also that's JP.
Yeah.
Almost like let's get him a hat when it's cold or something like that.
Yeah.
Does he have mittens? Going to Kansas.
yeah, exactly. Let's freeze. That I think that is true, and I think I do have an affection for my clients, and I feel like it's the same.
Yeah.
I have one client that just retired. She calls me. She's really sweet. She calls me her financial husband.
There we go.
Right? Yeah, and so and then sometimes I'll get in situations where we're having a conversation maybe with a prospect, and they're going over their life story, and then sometimes it's people have histories and stories, and it's unique from one person to the other, where maybe they'll start to tear up when you ask them certain questions. All right, and so one mistake I made was not having tissue paper on hand. Right, I'm trying to go, and now it's right next to me on the conference table. Right, just in case.
Tears up. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I spent an appointment last week, spent an extra 30 minutes talking to a client about their lives, about things in the past. So I really think that goes a long way, that genuine care, but you can't fake that, right? I mean, they see right through it.
No, yeah. If you're not authenticity.
Right.
So let's give some life advice here. We're gonna give some advice to JP circa 2000 and 2012. Getting ready. We're going back a little. You're still just out of college now.
Right.
If I'm doing my math right.
Yeah.
Give or take,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So if you were talking to you back then, or if you're talking to a young advisor that came to you and just said, "Hey, man, you're like, in 10 years I'm going to be you, but what advice would you give me? I'm in my mid-20s. Maybe some do's and don'ts for working with older clients."
Do's and don'ts for working with older clients. I would say, first and foremost, be fearless when you're going in there. Anybody can sense apprehension, whether you're one-on-one or in a group setting, giving a seminar presentation, right? And so, be confident, but that comes with the backing of having that knowledge. So also be a student of the game, right? Don't expect to learn everything you're going to need to know about this industry in 1 year and 2 years. As a matter of fact, you never will, right? Because it's a continuous process. But you just know that if you put in the work and you put in the reps, you're going to build on that foundation, and you're always going to know a little bit more than the person sitting in front of you, because if they're there for a reason. They have an expectation, and the expectation is to be given advice, to be taught. So already, automatically, you're in a position of authority. It's up to you not to lose that position, right? And so be fearless and be a student of the game.
I love it. I knew you were going to say it, and if you weren't, because I was thinking back with your background in athletics, with that idea, because you do hear people that don't, or you run into people that they talk about imposter syndrome,
Right?
and we all have felt that.
Yeah.
But the only way you defeat that is you've got to do the work,
Yeah.
gain the knowledge,
Oh,
and
yeah.
keep going. My dad gave me 2 bits of advice. One of them took me years till I finally figured out. But one was, I was like, Dad, how am I ever going to learn all this stuff? And he said, you know what? You learn, it'll come together. You'll get it, and then you'll get a little more, and you'll learn a little more, and then it'll all come together. And then he had this thing he wrote on the board, on this bulletin board in the office, and it said, when you know and you know, then fear turns to confidence. And I used to think that was the stupidest thing ever, probably because I didn't understand. I think maybe there was a comma missing. I don't know. But then I'm like, wait, when you know, and then you know that you know, exactly what you're saying, then fear turns to confidence.
Yeah,
But,
I like that.
all right, so that would be some great advice. What are you excited about going into the new year?
Going into the new year, lots to look forward to. And so with my practice, kind of have my plans and goals set for 2025. So ready to go out there and attack the process, right? And to help as many people as I can, really.
I like it. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to land this plane.
Okay.
We will have to have you back on later in 2025 because I'm curious to see how this goes because you are another conversation for us to have in the future is that difference, and I'm curious to see where you're at with working with the 403B market, and because you've got a great practice there, but then expanding more into the non-Florida
the traditional.
Yeah, the traditional, because that's two different animals there. So we will have you back on. So with that being said, JP, I have to say this. Thank you for joining us for this episode. If you get a chance, would love it if you would subscribe, follow the show. Any suggestions, any topic you'd like us to dive into, any criticisms, constructive or otherwise, I like them all. I love to read that stuff. Drop it in the comments. And you can find us wherever you like to consume podcasts, or you can catch us on YouTube. So with that being said, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks.